Destroying Bad Seeds, a fanfiction written by Sketch. The war was over, but that doesn't mean the tension that came with it had left completely. The Ohu army was still exhausted from fighting. Many spouses and orphans were still mourning the loss of their loved ones, and the one dog who made the whole situation harder for everyone refused to honor the sacrifices of the dead along with the survivors. The eldest son of Weed sat alone in front of a tree, his back turned to the Ohu army and completely concealing his scornful facial expression that didn't bear an ounce of respect on it. All the while, his 3 other siblings and several of their fellow soldiers gathered around several burial mounds, each dedicated to a fallen friend. Hero, Jaguar, Musashi, Lydia, Kenshin, and many more. Orion and Rigel sat in silence, the words towards their deceased comrades being exchanged only in thought. Bellatrix, on the other hand, was distracted by a different kind of emptiness, the empty space right next to her, where another one of her brothers should have been. The female mutt finally broke the silence with a sigh. "Excuse me for a minute." Bella begrudgingly stood up and walked over to the tree where the disgruntled Sirius was sitting. "Sirius, get over here and pay your respects like the rest of us are." The selfish older brother remained completely unmoved by Bellatrix's order. "Leave him alone, Bella," another male voice joined, and Sirius finally turned his head to see Rigel standing beside his sister. "The war's been hard on everybody. He'll join us when he's cooled down later." Sirius subtly furrowed his eyebrows before finally standing up and turning around. "I'm not going to join you murderers." Bella and Rigel glanced at each other with the same bewildered look on their faces after Sirius delivered that surprisingly cruel reply. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Why the hell should we mourn the deaths of our friends, yet celebrate the death of another?"
"Rigel, what is he talking about?"
"You know very well what I'm talking about. If none of you will grieve for my friend, then I won't do the same for yours." Sirius continued to whine pathetically, with tears welling up in his eyes. Bellatrix knew her usually merciful brother was slow to anger, yet of all things the death of a monster who showed no remorse towards the pain he caused countless others was what finally broke him. "Get the fuck away from my siblings, you scum!" The second eldest son of Weed finally threw himself into the space between Sirius and his other 2 siblings. He and everybody else had already overheard the conversation, but Orion, who tolerated the slander towards his family and fallen comrades the least, involuntarily had to halt his participation of the memorial as well. "They're my siblings too, traitor," Sirius replied coldly. "Since when have you ever put your family before your enemies?" Orion snarled, now face to face with his so-called brother. "The only traitor around here is you." "That's enough, you 4. A gruff voice, belonging to a Great Pyrenees mutt, joined the conversation. "If you're going to ruin the peace of the memorial, do it somewhere else." "I will not." Sirius barked stubbornly at Tama. "I will not allow you heartless monsters to continue celebrating this cruel victory." "Who the fuck are you calling monsters, you punk?" Kin rushed to his brother's side at Sirius's unbelievably immature and disrespectful comment. "Don't listen to him," Rigel said desperately. "He's just hysterical." "He's insane, that's what he is," Orion corrected. "You!" Sirius hollered at Kin, with any sense of reason or emotional control, as little of them as he had in the first place, completely gone now. "And your brother! And the entire Ohu army! All of you are monsters!" "You shut your damn mouth or I'll silence you for good!" Kin's even more thunderous voice still wouldn't be enough to get Sirius to stop, and it certainly didn't help that it only added more to the tension. The last thing the Ohu army needed after just ending another war merely a few hours ago. "Go ahead, then," Sirius continued, enraged yet smug at the same time. "Kill me. Kill me the way you killed Monsoon. All because you couldn't see the good inside of him, thanks to your selfishness. The sound of laughter suddenly resonated. Everybody turned their heads to discover that it came from Orion, but it was far from jovial. Orion's chuckle was bitter, a clear sign of the stress that his wishful, naive brother had caused the entire Ohu army, taking a toll on him. Yes, I'm sure Bob agrees with you, Orion mocked, almost grinning. As do Hiro-san, Lydia-san, and every other dog he killed in cold blood. Then those who died by his claws were all fools too. A shocked silence immediately followed, before it was broken by Kin. You little shit. Kin's eyes widened, and his facial muscles pulled back in utter contempt towards Sirius insulting his dead father. You better fucking take that back. No! Sirius shut his eyes and flipped his head back spitefully. Fucking take it back! I said no! Sirius's pride quickly left as soon as he found himself knocked onto the ground, pain stinging in his face where Kin's paw had smacked him. Fuck you, Kin seethed, eyes dilated and saliva cascading from his mouth. Hypocrites like you have no place in the Ohu army. Neither the pain from the blow nor Kin's threat was enough to faze Sirius. The entitled brat continued smirking, determined to have the last say. You're right, Kin. I'm no Ohu soldier. I'll never be the heartless perpetrator you've all been ever since the war you started with that Kakabuto. That's enough, Sirius! Bella shouted with a mix of anger and concern, but more so the former. Hurry up and apologize to Kin already! Don't bother, Orion replied. You heard what he said. And I'll say it again, Sirius continued in the same conceited tone as ever. None of you are better than all of those who tried to destroy paradise before. Sirius finally let out a pained gasp as he felt teeth close around the side of his neck. Tama tightened his grip even more until his teeth penetrated deep enough to draw blood. If this won't teach you to keep your mouth shut. Tama sneered with a muffled voice. Sirius gagged as his airways became more and more constricted in Tama's grasp. Yet the restrained voice, he continued to fight to prove he was right. Even if, he began, taking deep breaths to allow him to get all the words out. You kill me, you'll all still be the real bad guys. That does it! Kin rocketed towards Sirius and roughly shoved him onto his back. The collision was strong enough to get Tama to lose his grip on the smaller Kitakishi mutt, but Sirius was quickly rendered immobile again with Kin's paw pressed onto his stomach, and his eyes locked onto what lay between Sirius's legs. You've tainted my father's legacy for the last time! Sirius barely had time to react as Kin's teeth grabbed a hold of his scrotum. Much to Kin, Tama, and Orion's pleasure, Sirius writhed his whole body and let out a defeated, blood-curdling shriek as Kin's fangs pierced deeper into his genitals. Finally, Kin pulled his head back up, blood staining his lower lip. Rigel, Bellatrix, and the rest of the Ohu army could only wordlessly spectate the entire scene in shock and horror as Kin spat out Sirius's severed testicles onto the ground. Yet as brutal as the ordeal was, no one could say the anger of the younger generation of Ohu was unjustified. After all of Sirius's words had disgraced their cause, their loved ones, and the previous generation of Ohu soldiers who had fought tooth and nail to protect their home from enemies like Monsoon. The enemy that Sirius was in complete favor over his actual family. There, Kin declared proudly. Now everyone can see who you really are. Sirius could only tremble and exhale heavily, blood from between his legs pooling onto the dirt below. This should have been a sign of submission, but Orion knew a persistent face when he saw one. The same kind of persistent face that the previous leaders of Ohu had seen when Akakabuto and Hogan refused to die. No words need to be exchanged between the former brothers, as Orion could easily read Sirius's malicious intent, even with his masculinity stripped away. Sirius let out a pathetic cry as he felt Orion bite down onto the side of his head, his fangs slowly blinding his right eye. Sirius's screams continued as Tama grabbed hold of his upper mandible in his teeth, crushing the nasal bone and bending it in an unnatural angle. Everybody knew that Sirius didn't deserve the mercy of a quick and painless death. Kin was the last to make sure of that. The burly molluser made his way over to Sirius's belly again and effortlessly ripped a hole into it like a famished wolf tearing its prey alive. Finally, Sirius's struggle began to slow down from blood loss and the nauseating sight of several of his intestines now hanging from the corner of Kin's mouth. With his eye and nasal bone already impaired, Sirius began to feel his other senses slowly disappearing as the last few minutes of his traitor's dishonorable life trickled away. After 3 more agonizing minutes, the trio of young dogs dropped Sirius's limp body onto the ground, waiting for him to succumb at last. The canine was a near unrecognizable mess of blood and torn up flesh, eye punctured, upper jaw deformed, and several of his organs spilled out onto the ground. With what little consciousness he had left, Sirius could barely hear himself as he attempted to scorn his killers with his ego one last time.
You monsters will never know love. Especially not that I felt for Monsoon.
Then fucking join him. Orion finished unapologetically before he and everyone else around him turned their backs on Sirius and left, just as he had turned his back on them. The sound of cawing from above rang out, and the shadows of circling crows were cast onto Sirius's mutilated body. To them, he looked dead enough that they wouldn't bother to make sure before they descended down and started to pick off his innards. A true sense of peace filled the air of Putago Pass once again. The war was over. The traitors were punished. The bad seeds were eliminated.